Multimedia Publishing Incorporated, Denver, Colorado, presents the Get Acquainted series, introducing authors and places in American literature. This unit, written by Paul Friesen, introduces Samuel Langhorne Clemens, who wrote under the pseudonym of Mark Twain. This unit covers the first 32 years of his life, between 1835 and 1867. In this unit, you will learn who Samuel Clemens was, where and when he lived, how his boyhood experiences in Missouri provided him with an abundance of material for his novels, and how his sensitive nature and sympathies were directed toward the poor and downtrodden in society. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, writing under the pen name of Mark Twain, greatly enriched the body of American literature. From his pen flowed many stories and novels, and from his lips audiences around the world were entertained. He wrote and spoke from personal experience, for he had that rare virtue of being in the right place at the right time, both witnessing and doing things which offered him a wealth of first-hand experience from which to draw for the substance of his stories. He was a born storyteller, a talent which he utilized to full advantage. The talent of storytelling was his only heritage. Fame and wealth were hard-earned possessions, far removed in time and place from the poverty and obscurity of his birth. This two-room rented cabin near Florida, Missouri, was the family home when Samuel Clemens was born, November 30th, 1835. He was premature, sickly, barely alive, but the tireless energy which he possessed as a boy and as a man must already have asserted itself in the tiny body which refused to give up its life. This small cabin was his home for the first 4 years of his life. Here he shared the meager living space and scant provisions with his parents, 4 older children, and a slave girl, Jenny. His father, John Marshall Clemens, was a storekeeper and lawyer, but his generosity and unwavering honesty were often taken advantage of, so that the family lived on the verge of poverty during most of their years in Florida and later in Hannibal, Missouri. The legend states, into the narrow limits of this cabin was born Samuel Clemens, who, as Mark Twain, lived to cheer and comfort a tired world. Late in life, he recorded in his autobiography, recently, someone sent me a picture of the house I was born in. Heretofore, I've always stated that it was a palace, but I shall be more guarded now. The limits of the village near which he was born were almost as narrow as his cabin. The village itself is almost extinct today, but the memory of it, as Mark Twain's birthplace, is preserved in this memorial shrine, located in the Mark Twain State Park, 2 miles south of Florida. Inside the shrine are mementos, a library, and the cabin in which he was born. In his autobiography, Mark Twain boasted, "The village contained 100 people, and I increased the population by 1%. It is more than many of the best men in history could have done for a town." The Clemens family had been drawn to Florida by Sam's uncle, John Quarles, who claimed, along with other promoters, that Florida would become the prosperous crossroads of the nation. Nearby Salt Creek could be dredged and would carry ships from all over the world to the great port of Florida, Missouri. The speculations remained only a dream, and John Marshall Clemens, seeing that the town would never prosper, moved to Hannibal, about 40 miles to the northeast, when Sam was 4 years of age. Hannibal was also a small town, but with its Mississippi River port and increased shipping along the river during a time of westward expansion, it held the promise of being at least a prosperous town, if not a booming metropolis. The Mississippi River was about a mile wide at Hannibal, a channel for commerce in the heart of the nation, and a readily accessible and limitless playground for adventurous boys. Swimming, boating, and ice skating were favorite pastimes, and young Sam Clemens soon became a leader of youthful pirates, explorers, and robbers who explored the river, the islands, and the wooded shoreline. Sam lived in Hannibal for the next 14 years. Although poor, the family maintained a sense of dignity and optimism. John Clemens was a respected lawyer. His wife was a capable manager of the household, and his sons Orion and Henry and his daughter Pamela were well behaved. But Sam, well, there were too many temptations, and he always was ready to yield. Especially gifted in pranks and playing hooky from school, he kept his mother in constant turmoil. The boyhood home of Mark Twain was erected by his father in 1844. It stands today not only as a museum memorializing Mark Twain, but also as a tribute to his fictional characters Tom Sawyer, Becky Thatcher, Huckleberry Finn, and all the rest. It was a simple, ordinary frame house, and it was located perfectly for an inquisitive, adventurous boy. A block from Main Street, a few blocks from the river, and across the street from the prettiest girl in town. A short distance to the rear was Holliday's Hill, and in the opposite direction at the south edge of town was Bear Creek. 2 miles south was the Cave. Activity at any one of these places usually found Sam Clemens an active participant. Beside the house stood the board fence Tom Sawyer persuaded his gang to pay him for the privilege of whitewashing. Tom sat by and saw that it was well done. This incident, along with many others in the 2 novels, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, was drawn from actual experience. Sam was ordered to whitewash the fence as punishment for playing hooky and going swimming. Sam, seeing one of his friends coming, began whitewashing carefully, pretending that it required great skill. Soon his friend John Roberts begged to try it, offering Sam the rest of his apple. Sam reluctantly gave up the brush, first to John and then to a host of boys who paid him for the privilege of painting. The Saturday was still young when the boys ran out of whitewash, having applied 3 generous coats, and Sam's scheme had netted him a treasure of privilege payments, a part of a jew's harp, a spool cannon, a kitten with 1 eye, a piece of blue bottle glass, a brass doorknob, a dead rat, 12 marbles, the handle of a knife, a glass stopper of a decanter, and 4 pieces of orange peel, plus John Roberts' apple. Day or night, Sam was ready for adventure. He shared this bedroom with his brother Henry, who was a model of behavior and obedience. Many a night Henry slept alone while Sam crawled out of bed and through the window in answer to a beckoning imitation of a cat's meow from outside. The drain pipe offered a handy escape to the ground, where Sam quickly followed the signal to its source, Tom Blankenship. Together, the two would hunt for buried treasure or try to get rid of warts with a dead cat in a graveyard. The two were inseparable companions, as were their counterparts, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Tom Blankenship, Huck Finn, was 4 years older than Sam Clemens. He was the son of the town drunkard. Later, Sam reflected in his autobiography, "He was ignorant, unwashed, insufficiently fed, but he had as good a heart as ever any boy had. He was the only really independent person in the community, and by consequence, he was tranquilly and continuously happy, and was envied by all the rest of us. We liked him, we enjoyed his society, and as his society was forbidden us by our parents, we sought and got more of his society than of any other boys." Tom Blankenship's home, long gone now, was a huge barn-like structure about 1 block from Sam's house. There were 8 children in the family, all uneducated and unchurched. Food and clothing were scarce, and the reform of the family seemed beyond the best efforts of the community. Holliday's Hill was a favorite playground for the boys. In the novels, Mark Twain called it Cardiff Hill. This is the foot of Cardiff Hill, made famous in Mark Twain's books Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. On the hill, Tom, Huck, and their gang played and roamed at will. From the summit of this hill, Sam Clemens, Tom Blankenship, and 2 other boys pried a large rock, weighing perhaps a ton, out of its bed and sent it rolling into town. It crashed through bushes and trees, scattered a woodpile, sailed over a wagon on the road, and ripped through a frame cooper's shop, snatching and destroying a workbench between the startled workers. The boys watched the magnificent performance, but scampered in the opposite direction as investigators began to climb the hill. Another childhood friend of Sam's was Annie Laurie Hawkins, whose home was directly across the street from his. Sam was immediately attracted to this charming girl who had just moved to town, and he used all his boyish acrobatic stunts to capture her attention. Annie Laurie was Becky Thatcher in the novels. This was the home of Becky Thatcher, Tom Sawyer's first sweetheart in Mark Twain's book, Tom Sawyer. Tom thought Becky to be the essence of all that is charming in womanhood. Late in life, Mark Twain reminisced. Annie Laurie Hawkins was the very first sweetheart I ever had. She was 5 years old, and I the same. I had an apple and fell in love with her and gave her the core. As the daughter of wealthy Judge Hawkins, Annie Laurie lived in a large house surrounded by luxury. But as Sam's girlfriend, Annie disregarded the differences in wealth and status. She liked him, and he liked her. That was all that mattered. On one occasion, they attended a picnic near the large cave south of town. After the picnic, there was a dash for the cave. Sam and his gang knew the cave well, venturing through many of its winding passages as they pretended to be robbers or pirates. But on this occasion, after the group had spent some time exploring, Sam and Annie wandered off, hand in hand, into remote and unfamiliar passages of the giant cavern. In his autobiography, Mark Twain explained, the cave was miles in extent and was a tangled wilderness of narrow and lofty clefts and passages. It was an easy place to get lost in. Anybody could do it, including the bats. I got lost in it myself, along with a lady, and our last candle burned down to almost nothing before we glimpsed the search party's lights winding about in the distance. The original opening, barred shut after Sam's and Annie's frightening experience, was further up the hillside from the present entrance. The cave, still with many areas unexplored, is open today for visitors to enjoy something of the excitement that Sam Clemens and his gang experienced. John Marshall Clemens was a justice of the peace in Hannibal. His office was near the family home. Judge Clemens, as he was called, was a popular lawyer, an honest, fair, and impartial mediator, but his fees were low and often difficult to collect. In one murder case, he took 28 testimonies, wrote over 13,000 words in longhand, and collected a meager $13.50 for many days of work. His office was modestly furnished. A three-legged stool and a wooden box served for the judge's bench. The jury, when needed, sat on a log. It was a crude courtroom, but dignity and silence were demanded and obtained by the bench. Once, when an enraged witness fired a revolver, Judge Clemens knocked him out with his gavel. In his father's law office, young Sam Clemens saw a dead man on the floor one night. Sam went out a window, taking the sash along with him. I didn't need the sash, he recalled, but it was handier to take it than it was to leave it, so I took it. I wasn't exactly scared, but I was considerably agitated. The dead man was the victim of a stabbing, and the body had been taken to the law office. Sam was there that night because he had played hooky from school and was afraid to go home until his mother was asleep. Sam Clemens' associations with death were numerous. He himself had been saved from drowning 9 times. He witnessed the drowning of Dutchie. He saw Bill Osley, a local merchant, murder Uncle Sam Smar with a pistol shot, and he saw a prisoner in the local jail fall into the flames of his burning jail cell, set on fire accidentally by the matches which young Sam had given him for his pipe. He also had an experience with death in his own family when he suffered through 2 weeks of intense grief as his father lay dying of pneumonia. His father suffered an untimely death. He was only 48 years old and a choice candidate for clerk of the circuit court. During the latter part of his father's life, They were forced by poverty to rent out their house and move into an upstairs apartment in the house of the Pilasters. John Marshall Clemens, Mark Twain's father, died in this house in 1847. Now, as his body lay in state in this house, Sam, unable to sleep, heard a noise coming from the room where his father lay. Creeping to the keyhole in hopes of seeing his father miraculously resurrected to life, he watched in horror as the doctor performed an autopsy on the body. A year later, fatherless and penniless, Sam Clemens, only 12 years old, dropped out of school. His boyhood was over. He became an apprentice on a local newspaper. He received skimpy meals and second-hand clothing, but no wages. But the work suited him. Thereafter, printing and writing became his passion and his livelihood. For 5 years, he worked in the printing business, rewarded not by money, but by a wealth of experience. One day, he read an ad announcing a World's Fair in New York City. Eager for adventure, and with barely enough money to get to New York, he left Hannibal as a 17-year-old youth, never to return as a permanent resident. But memories of Hannibal were permanently retained in his novels about Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Following a year of traveling and working in New York and Philadelphia, he submitted to his brother Orion's pleas for help in his newspaper business. Sam tried to help, but his best efforts failed. Besides, great wealth and adventure beckoned in the form of cocoa plantations in the Amazon River Valley. With a $50 bill which he found, and earnings from a newspaper job in Cincinnati, he boarded a steamboat for New Orleans. In New Orleans, he learned that no ship would sail for at least 10 years to South America. The boyhood ambition of piloting a steamboat now attracted him. In Life on the Mississippi, he wrote, "When I was a boy, there was but one permanent ambition among my comrades in our village on the west bank of the Mississippi River. That was to be a steamboatman." Sam had come down the Mississippi on a boat steered by Horace Bixby. Now in New Orleans, he begged Bixby to teach him to be a pilot. Bixby finally agreed to do it for $500. Sam thought it would be easy to steer a steamboat in a river a mile wide. But he soon learned that the river contained sandbars and snags, that the deep water constantly changed its course, and that he had to memorize every foot of the river and the shoreline for 1,200 miles. The steamboats were grand floating palaces. Sam described one as it docked at the wharf in Hannibal. And the boat is rather a handsome sight, too. She is long and sharp and trim and pretty. She has 2 tall, fancy-topped chimneys, with a gilded device of some kind swung between them, a fanciful pilot house, all glass and gingerbread, perched on top of the Texas deck. The boiler deck, the hurricane deck, and the Texas deck are fenced and ornamented with clean white railings. Sam learned the river and soon became a lightning pilot. He was only 22 years old when he was granted his pilot's license. With a salary of $250 a month and a wealth of respect from fellow pilots, he was satisfied. He had found his calling. It was a good life for 3 years. His good fortune was cut short by the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. All shipping was halted, and once again Sam found himself without a job. After 3 weeks as a member of the Civil War militia group called the Marion Rangers, which disbanded after they shot and killed an innocent farmer by mistake, Sam learned that Orion had been appointed Secretary of the Territory of Nevada. Orion asked Sam to be his personal secretary. Together, they took the overland stagecoach from Missouri to Nevada. Sam recorded these Western episodes in his book, Roughing It. They arrived in Carson City, Nevada, in September of 1861. Carson City was a town of 2,000 people, mostly silver and gold prospectors. Sam almost immediately caught the fever and began buying stock in local mines. Then he began prospecting, but the big strike never came, and he nearly lost his life in a snowstorm one night as he was returning from a mining trip. Failure, hunger, and homesickness discouraged him as he dug furiously in the earth for gold. His gold, however, was to come from a different source. One day he received a letter from the editor of the Virginia City Enterprise, offering him a job as city editor for $25 a week. Later in his autobiography, Sam recalled, "I took the position with joy because there was a salary attached to it, and I had always wanted a position which paid in the opposite proportion of value to amount of work." He walked the 130 miles to Virginia City, began work as a reporter, and finally established himself as a respectable writer. After 5 years in the West, he sailed for New York. His days as a steamboat pilot, as a prospector, and as a reporter were over. His future as a world traveler, novelist, and lecturer had begun. In Virginia City, Sam began to use the name Mark Twain in memory and in honor of Captain Sellers, a Mississippi steamboat pilot. Under this name, he launched into the literary world, eventually publishing 26 volumes of novels, short stories, and essays, plus writing numerous speeches and newspaper pieces. His first novel was the story of his own youth in Hannibal, entitled The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. The sequel to Tom Sawyer was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Both are books about boys, but both contain serious social comments. Lionel Trilling, a noted critic, has stated that Huckleberry Finn is Mark Twain's masterpiece, and perhaps he learned to know that. But he could scarcely have estimated it for what it is, one of the world's great books, and one of the central documents of American culture. Wherein does its greatness lie? Primarily in its power of telling the truth. Mark Twain told the truth about American society in the late 19th century. He was known as a humorist, but his humor was loaded with satire, aimed at the greedy, insensitive, power-hungry, and power-asserting aristocracy in America. He defended the underdog. He exposed corruption. He championed the cause of equality and justice. From his youth in Hannibal, where his statue in Riverview Park overlooks the Mississippi River, to his coming of age as a writer on the East Coast, Mark Twain remained sensitive to the cares and the problems of the human race.